But let's go back onto the prison work that you did.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from realizing that the stigma's not there and these people are being, loneliness is hurting them, as you said, what were the other main takeaways of working in a prison? Because again, stigma. People are in prison. They must be no good for society. You must have heard and seen things that, and you probably thought to yourself, you could do a lot of great things out there, but you're here. You know?
Yeah. I think one of the key elements of working in prison is about the release of the person who is in prison and what they then take away from the experience, the therapeutic experience they've had, to apply that to their lives outside prison. So for me, I was always feeling this sense of, I want to see, I guess, this individual be able to walk away from this therapeutic intervention and know that when they leave prison, that actually they could be a better human being. That was ultimately my goal. I think the great thing about the prisons that I worked in and the managers that I had is that they didn't necessarily have a time limit on therapy. They would allow you the space to be able to work with individuals for as long as they felt that was needed. So there was a lot more flexibility, I guess, within the therapeutic space within prison. But yeah, definitely I would say the fact that actually you've got the commitment of an individual who's going to turn up at sessions, and actually you could use those sessions to help promote a better vision of themselves so that when they leave that space, that they could be better human beings. That was, I guess, ultimately my goal. Doesn't always happen, but it was definitely what I wanted to be able to achieve.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being easy at all, even if you do have more access to their time. But I suppose my question is, hopefully I'm not overstepping any boundaries, but were there any particular types of problems? Were there any correlations between the people that you were seeing in prison?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I ended my work within prison is because I was being faced with very similar issues all the time. Often trauma, often abuse within childhood that was not necessarily recognized by social services, or someone that went to school ended up, possibly going throughout school without social care intervention, but then they were being sort of regularly abused at home. So we had a lot of referrals like that, where children or young men in particular had a history of abuse that just wasn't really, I guess, identified by school or by social care, and then there was a sense of failure. They felt failed.
When you say young men, are you saying that the prison you worked in was for young men, or
it was a male prison, and they would talk about their,
not for juveniles? It was 18 and above.
Yeah.
So even sometimes in 40-year-old men, you would notice instantly that the experiences that they had in their early adolescence years,
that's what they would be bringing in.
Right.
That's what they would be bringing into the therapy session. Yeah. And this is why I said the isolation sometimes bring back memories that become really difficult to manage in a prison environment, because there's no escape. You can't, go out and do something to get rid of that, or do an activity when you want. You're left in a space on your own, and you're left with those thoughts. So yeah, they would be coming in to therapy sessions with memories of that trauma, memories that possibly felt stronger than they had ever felt before. So that was becoming a regular thing for me to sit down and sort of listen to.
I'm somewhat conflicted on this next point, because yes, they're in prison, they have all the time in the world to focus on themselves. But actually, I think you have to be very mentally strong in order to do that, because if we consider that you're in prison and now your chances within society are quite limited, there's a stigma to people who leave prison. And also, your thoughts, whoever you are, your thoughts eat you up. So if you're with your thoughts 24 hours a day, no real distraction, then therapy is probably more difficult to take in, right? Because if you're someone who has self-doubting thoughts, you might, as a therapist, say to someone outside of prison, maybe you want to enjoy some activities, meet some friends, go for a run, but you can't do that. If you're someone who's self-sabotaging, then you have 24 hours a day to self-sabotage yourself in a prison.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to assume that it's harder to have successful therapy sessions in prison, am I assuming right or wrong?
So where it concerns, I guess, the follow-up after therapy sessions, and I think that's what I'm hearing you talk about, is actually what can I do outside that therapeutic space that then helps me get into a better space? Definitely, I would say yes. What you can do within a prison environment is going to be limited to a certain extent. However, where it concerns with the therapeutic space, the coming into that space and exploring, I actually would say in prison, people come ready for therapy.
Oh, wow.
Like the first session, I'm just so amazed at how open, and it's almost like a pour out. In fact, before starting in a prison, I remember my manager saying, the one thing you're going to notice about prison work is that your first session is often going to be where they pour out everything. In community, that's very different. You've got to sort of build a relationship, become comfortable. In prison, that was so different. First sessions, I had to make sure I had tissues and things like that because I knew that people were going to come in and they were just going to pour out and be in a place of distress because they trust you. So it's actually the second and third session that's always the challenge. Getting them to come back when they've been that vulnerable, it can sometimes be challenging. Yeah, they would sometimes not turn up for the second session because they were so embarrassed. They were left with that embarrassment because they just opened up and, yeah, became vulnerable. They were so vulnerable. So the two differences is that, yes, there's a lot less that you can do outside the therapeutic session because they are limited and they have sort of times to do certain things. But actually in the session, I found that actually I got more, people were more open within that environment.
Yeah, I'm very surprised by that. I'm very pleasantly surprised by that. I guess it is a good thing. It's not what you expect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So is this something that you can request in prisons, or is it a part of a program where people are sent to you?
Yeah, it's works very, very much like it works in the community. You go to your GP, the GP could recommend this as something that you want to do, and yeah, you would access it through choice rather than having to.
How often, so before these prison session starts, do you know what those people are in for, or is it a blank sheet?
Good question, yeah. We do have access to their information.
Okay.
It would really be down to the therapist on whether they were going to read all that information before going in. In my experience of working even within the community, it's your responsibility to read the information.
Right.
What you might get within the prison is what we call alerts. So there would be things that you have to know. So yeah, I have to know that this client has a group of people that they don't tend to work with, or they've attacked a member of staff. And so you'd have all those sort of areas of information.
Is that racial, for example? Is that a racial thing?
It could be, yeah. So if there was a racial attack, or it was sexist statements, all that would be upfront, so you would know all those
right
as an emergency alert.
But not their crimes.
Their crimes you could look into. I could find that information out, but whether you would choose to do that or not is down to you. But yeah, if their crimes were generally a physical violence, that would come up as an alert anyhow for you as a therapist working within a prison environment. And
indulge with our listeners, just briefly describe the setting that you're sitting in with these people.
So it's actually a healthcare setting, just like any other healthcare setting in a community. Most prisons have a healthcare setting, very much like your GP setting, which you have GP access and mental health practitioners. You might even say that it works slightly better within prison because everybody has to work together. So we're all in the same building and so it's easy to get information and share information. I'm just across the corridor from their GP or the nurse. They're all working together, so you tend to find that sharing of information is much easier within the prison environment. And it's good that it is like that because of the nature of the environment as well.
Did you ever, I know earlier you alluded to the traumas were repetitive and you almost had to leave, but did you ever see any certain correlations between empathetic people and their crimes or ages? Were there ages where more people were more remorseful and wanted to go to therapy? Did you find that parents were more prisoners that were parents outside of prison more likely to do therapy? Did you ever see a pattern like that? Or was it random?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Because in general, no, I didn't. Possibly because I never really looked at it as a research sort of aspect. I was never really in that frame of mind when working within prison. I was more familiar with the issues that were being explored within the prison environment. And I think that was largely due to how it affected me. So when you're hearing a lot of child abuse all the time, you do feel, this is becoming a subject matter that I'm getting a lot of repeats, and you're hearing it over and over again. And I think, as I said, that was one of the reasons I felt actually I really want to come out of this space, because it's becoming quite familiar, the type of I guess stories that you're listening to. People's personal stories were very similar. So it did feel like I needed to move for that reason. Where it concerns the types of people, I would think there was a cross section of the types of people that would come to therapy.
Whenever I listen to professionals like yourself in person or on the internet, like a Dr. Gabor Mate, for example, I always hear a correlation between abusers and horrible childhoods. It could be drug abusers, could be child abusers, could be domestic violence abusers. There's always something that says that this person, in their mind, they had it ingrained in them that these behaviors were somewhat acceptable. It could be the child who at 25 rationalized the idea of it was okay that my parents beat me because they loved me and I was a bad child, right? And that could be as much as one slap to much more, right? So what I'm trying to say is that if the parents, for whatever reason, don't indulge the right mechanics and thought patterns into these children, they then carry that with them. And then when they deal with the rest of society, they have certain ways of thinking that actually, even though it's no fault of your own, this is not acceptable. And then we have to put them in jail. And so why is childhood, from a professional standpoint, why is childhood so important?
It's what we learn. I think, they said there was a saying, give me a child until they're 7 and you give me the man or the woman.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, here's the full podcast right here on my right, maybe your left. I'm not sure how YouTube works. Or here is another clip right here. Take care, everybody. See you on the next one.